It's been a while.
It's a long time ago. So good morning. My name is Kathy Lazarus, and I represent the League of Women Voters on the coalition. It's my pleasure, I guess, today to introduce our speaker. My obligation this morning to introduce our speaker, Don Wieden. I should tell you parenthetically that I first met Don when I was a planning intern in the Santa Clara County Planning Department in
something.
Yeah, Neanderthal. Thank you, Gary. I think it was like in 1975 or something. Don was with the County Planning Department for 34 years, and he developed a lot of very important fundamental policy documents that are still in force today in Santa Clara County regarding land use growth, land use, open space, housing, many other things. Don was one of the first people to really identify the problems that would emerge from the jobs housing imbalance, which we are still dealing with today. Since Don's retirement, and I use that in quotes, he's taken on the role as an unpaid community advisor and educator. Don is very giving of his time and goes around to various communities to give his PowerPoint presentation that talks about the changes and challenges that we all need to consider as we think about the future of Santa Clara County, which we all love and we call home. In 2013, Don was inducted into the Planner Emeritus Network of the California chapter of the American Planning Association. And believe me, that's a big deal. So it's a real pleasure this morning to introduce Don Wieden.
Good morning. Let me just take a moment or so to get the technology all turned on here, and let's even see if that works. They won't squeal too much. All right, is that working at all?
Yeah.
Oh, hallelujah. Well, thank you, Kathy, for that introduction. You didn't have to bite your tongue too much to say those words. We've known each other a long, long time. Glad to see you all here this morning. We're going to be taking a brief trip into the future. What does the future of Santa Clara County look like? Because we are, as the basic premise of my presentation is that we are at a transition point between eras. And I'll explain that in just a moment. I think the best way to do this, just to get started on it, and start with a few brief announcements. I'm not here to tell you how to plan your city. I don't know that much about Los Altos. I live in Mountain View, but it's your city is your territories, and so that's not my job today to say, well, here's what you should do downtown or any other place. In fact, my talk isn't specifically about Los Altos. It's about the county as a whole. But what happens throughout the county will also impact Los Altos. Now, the goals of my presentation this morning are threefold. I want to describe some of the forces that cause places to change over time, identify some major forces currently changing Santa Clara County, and suggest how we can make Santa Clara County 3.0, as I refer to it, even better than 2.0, which is what we've lived with for the past 50 years. Start with one of my favorite quotes about planning, about the importance of being proactive and not just letting the future happen. And that is, when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. Those who make it happen, those who let it happen, and those who wonder what happened. Clearly, based on your mission statement this morning, you are a group that wants to make it happen. So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm going to give you a summary of my presentation. Basically, everything I have to say can be summarized in the following 6 or 8 slides, something like that. First point is somewhat obvious. When places change over time, they change as a result of both internal and external forces. That most of the time, the change that occurs in the community is gradual, but sometimes it's more abrupt and more rapid, and that's what we're going through right now, is one of those periods where things are more rapid and more dramatic. And that marks, those sorts of changes mark what I refer to as the difference between eras, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. But we are about to enter a new era, which is a new era of growth and development in Santa Clara County. And it can be characterized as an era in which we are becoming a more hybrid place, both urban and suburban place, a bit of both, or Santa Clara County 3.0 as I refer to it. I don't believe that we are particularly well prepared for some of the changes that are coming. They're bigger than what we've been thinking about. They're different from what we may be planning for. I think it's very much in doubt whether Santa Clara County 3.0 will be better than Santa Clara County 2.0, but I believe it can be better if we do the right things. And so those are the basic points I'm going to be making. That's the basic premise of my whole presentation, is we're at the era of change. It's very much up to us to decide how the future plays out and through the planning we do in our individual local communities. So first, some just sort of generic background about the evolution of places. And when I say places, I could talk about it at any different geographic, a number of different geographic levels. I'm focusing particularly on the county level, Santa Clara County in particular. As I indicated in the summary, places are shaped by many forces, a combination of internal things that are going on within the community, as well as external forces that we have less control over, perhaps. These forces, my shorthand as a planner for the things that shape our communities are the winds of change. It's just kind of a cutesy way of sort of summarizing all of the different demographic, economic, geographic, political, and legal, technological, environmental, and even philosophical forces that shape the way we plan our cities and the way they evolve over time. These winds of change are blowing constantly. Sometimes they're blowing gently, and changes occur very slowly and over a period of time. Sometimes they blow more forcefully and bring about changes in more rapid fashion. That's where we are right now, as the winds of change have never been, in recent years, been blowing as forcefully as they are today. During normal times, cities don't need to do a lot of adaptation. It occurs slowly over time. But when we enter periods like right now where we have structural changes occurring, we need to adapt to them. We can't simply say, well, we'll wait until the cycle plays itself out and think it'll get back to normal, because we're headed towards a whole host of new normals. What we've taken for normal over the last 50 years, say, will no longer be true in many cases, and so we need to adapt to that. We can't simply wait till things go back to the old normal, because they aren't going back. Some of the forces that bring about change in communities are demographic. Some of them are economic opportunities, such as the gold rush that brought people from all over the world to this state. Sometimes it's a lack of economic opportunity driving people away from other places. Sometimes it's transportation improvements that make it easier for people to get across the country. Transportation technology changes. Communication technology changes. Natural forces. 1989 earthquake that knocked down the Embarcadero Freeway opened up a whole new possibility for San Francisco in the way it redeveloped its waterfront. So sometimes changes occur in rather violent ways. Sometimes it's changes in technology that make a difference. For example, one of the major ones that has impacted this country was the development of air conditioning. I mean, without that, the population of Arizona would be either 5 or 6 right now, I think. It would not have been possible without air conditioning. People would not want to live there. It can be changes in the local economy, as in this case in Santa Clara County, we evolved from an agricultural economy to a high-tech economy. It's changes in land economics that as places become more built out and more desirable and continue to be desirable, the natural economic reaction is to build up and build bigger. So all of these things are working in various combinations and changing over time to reshape the places we live in. So that's kind of the basic philosophical premise of the presentation. Let's get into some of the specifics here. Talk about the evolution of Santa Clara County. I'm referring to Santa Clara County 3.0 as a new era, and by era I mean it's the dictionary definition that it's a long, distinct period of history of a particular feature or characteristics. And I think Santa Clara County has gone through 3 eras. We're about to enter into the 3rd. There was the pre-suburban era, which is 1.0. The suburban era that we're just evolving out of right now is 2.0. And the urban suburban era is 3.0, and that's what we're heading into. For those history buffs, you would probably say, well, what about the Ohlone era, and the Mission and Ranchos era, and the Valley Hearts Delight era, and all of that? Okay, I get it. I'm lumping them all together in the pre-suburban era. This is not a history talk today, this is about planning for the future, but I just want to acknowledge that, yes, I realize that there were those other eras as part of our history. In order to understand Santa Clara County 3.0, I want to take just a moment to explain how did we get to 2.0? How did we transition from 1.0, the pre-suburban, to the suburban era? How did that take place? And it's a story that intertwines both local things that happen locally and things that happen nationally. And it goes back quite a ways. It goes back even before the 50s. We tend to think of the suburban era as sort of began in the 1950s. It really began back during the Depression, strangely enough. A terrible time in our history. But in the midst of all of that, there was the 1939 World's Fair held in New York City. And and it was visited by millions of people from all around the country and all around the world. Had a major impact on people's thinking. Remember, this was terrible times when it was really hard to see any silver lining anywhere. And in the midst of all of this was the General Motors World of the Future diorama, which if you go online and Google, you can find, or go onto YouTube, there's an excellent little video that shows, this is not a mural, this in the middle here, that's not a mural, that's little cars running around all over that. It was a very lifelike sort of miniature version of what the future could be like if we became, if we used the automobile as a vehicle for freedom. And so this was the suburbs. This was the blueprint for suburbia. And it was laid out in 1939 at the World's Fair, which, as I said, was attended by millions of people. And if it hadn't been for the Depression and World War II, we'd have started building it probably right away, right then. But obviously, both of those events intervened. And during that same time, the Depression and World War II, we were not reinvesting in keeping up our properties and homes and buildings and infrastructure in cities, so our cities were decaying. And so we went through this period where the suburbs were sort of delayed in their initiation. They would have happened much sooner had it not been for World War II and the Depression. But the war eventually did come to an end and things changed. And there were a number of things we needed to react to as a society. One of them was the need to provide peacetime employment for our returning veterans who needed jobs. And we couldn't just keep building tanks because there really wasn't much market for them after the war was over. We also had to build housing for the baby boom families, to house the families and the young children. I'm not actually a baby boomer, but I can't resist the opportunity to get my dad and mom in the picture. There was plenty of vacant land throughout the country and cheap gasoline. Back then, gas was under 30 cents a gallon in most places. And we developed the interstate highway system back in the beginning of the suburban era. It was originally intended for defense purposes to help us get troops across the country quickly if we were ever invaded. But it ended up having a far greater impact on our land use planning and land use policy by opening up lots of land for development and making it accessible by the automobile, which is very much the General Motors World of the Future model that was presented at the 1939 World's Fair. We also developed so the development of the suburbs was a response to these changing conditions in the external world, the need to provide housing, employment, and alternative lifestyles for people who didn't want to live in what had become rather run-down city centers. We also had here in California a great many World War II veterans who either were stationed here during the war or passed through on their way to the Pacific, to the war in the Pacific, who, when they came back when the war was over, decided, you know, California or Iowa? California, not a difficult choice for most people, climate-wise or otherwise. And fortunately, there was also the beginnings of our aerospace and electronics industry here in Santa Clara County, which provided employment, which is a magnet pulling people. There's no point in moving to a place we can't get a job. There were jobs here. Not only good climate and all that, but jobs. And there were companies willing to build housing. We just learned about this a short time ago, that Kaiser, the folks who, Kaiser Health Plan, Kaiser Quarry, actually built homes back in the early 50s as well. There's Kaiser Homes. So there's lots of opportunity for employment and for housing and so on, employment in the housing and real estate industries. This was a booming place. As a result, our population went in 1950 from under 300,000 to over 1 million in just 20 years. And that was the transition between Santa Clara 1.0, the Valley of Art's Delight, as it was often referred to back then, the orchards and the agriculture and so on, to Santa Clara County 2.0, which is what we've been living with for the last 50 years, roughly. So let's move on then. That's sort of historical. That shows how major forces in the world and locally help to bring about changes in the communities we live in and so on. Let's talk about what are the driving forces that are going to be bringing about 3.0, this transition to this new era. Start with a few technical notes. Caution, data ahead. I'm not a data guy, but I've got to use some numbers a little bit to talk about the future, so don't worry, it won't be all that painful. There's not that many of them. I'm going to be using some projections, and projections are not cast in stone. They're just best guesses as to what the future might be like based on current conditions and trends. And the specific numbers I'm going to toss out don't really matter all that much. The general direction is it up, is it down? What's the relative magnitude of things? So that's what you need to look at. Don't worry about, did he say 272,000 or was that 275,000? Don't worry about that, that doesn't matter. So, and also the final sort of note here is that something I'll talk about are like county-wide averages, and obviously things are different within different places in the county, so Los Altos may be very different than the county-wide average on certain things and so on. All right, the first thing that's going to be changing Santa Clara County from 2.0 to 3.0 is population growth. And again, time out for some technical notes. Oops, what's happening here? That worked just fine last night. We have two different sets of projections. First of all are the Associated Bay Area Government's projections. That doesn't look good, does it? All right, let's keep moving. There's the Department of Finance, which is a state agency, and there's the Association of Bay Area Governments. The difference is the Department of Finance projections, the state agencies, theirs are sort of laissez-faire. They're based on where has growth occurred in the past. So in other words, if we didn't build enough housing for our workforce in Santa Clara County and we forced them all to move to live in the Central Valley, that's what the Department of Finance forecasts are. Simply if trends continued as they were in the past, what would happen? Whereas ABAGs are policy-driven, where should that growth occur? If Santa Clara County is going to build all this, create all these jobs, they ought to also be responsible for providing housing for those workers. That's the basic philosophy underlying them. And that's required by the ABAG, is often villainized, but what they're doing is implementing what is state policy and state law that they're required to carry out. The result is that the ABAG forecasts are higher than the Department of Finance projections. Department of Finance says 273,000 more people over the next 15 years, between now and 2030. ABAGs are 320,000. Again, don't worry about the absolute numbers. The good news is that the average works out to be about 300,000, so we'll just go with that. Use that as it really doesn't matter which of the others is going to prove to be true. Probably neither of them will be exactly right. But just to get a sense of the magnitude of things, 300,000 people, well, what is that? That's 2 more Sunnyvales. Primarily in the North Valley. And the reason it's in the North Valley is the second force that's driving us into Santa Clara County 3.0, which is limited land supply. If you look at a map of Santa Clara County, this is what it looks like basically, aerial photo. Palo Alto, north, San Jose, central, and Gilroy in the south. About 2/3 of the land mass of Santa Clara County is hillsides and mountains. We're not going to accommodate a lot of population by building new cities or major subdivisions up in the hills or mountains. Plus, we don't really want to. We've decided that keeping them as open space is more important to us as a community and as a county. That leaves then the South Valley or Coyote Valley, and for any number of reasons, that's not likely to be where most of the growth occurs, which basically leaves only one place, the North Valley. So essentially, that 300,000 population growth will be occurring between Palo Alto and San Jose in that general area. So here's roughly what it looks like. This is our current population. Adding 300,000 more people looks like that. Only it's not going to be out at the periphery somewhere like that diagram sort of indicates. It's going to be scattered throughout our communities. It will be causing changes within each and every community in the valley to some degree or another. So that's the second thing. So population growth is the first one, limited land supply the second. Third one that's bringing us into 3.0, into Santa Clara County 3.0, is job growth. We are fortunate here to have had and continue to have a very healthy economy. And that local economy gives us a high quality of life, both in terms of the incomes it provides for local households and the revenues it provides for local governments. So you can't underestimate the importance of that. Just ask places like Detroit what it's like not to have a healthy economy. And jobs are people magnets. Where you have jobs, you bring new jobs, brings new people. So that's going to be an ongoing part of the equation. Additional factor that's moving us towards Santa Clara County 3.0 is the aging of the baby boom generation. And to explain that, I'm going to go really global, literally, for a moment here. Over the next 15 years, roughly, the world's population is projected to grow by another 1.4 billion people. Kind of an overwhelming number. But probably not for the reasons that most of you are thinking of. We're just having too many babies. We're going to get people to have fewer babies, whatever. The reality is that the number of births worldwide has been steady for the last decade. It hasn't been going up. It's not like that there are more and more kids being born. And it's projected that that will remain constant or relatively level over the next decade. Well, how can our population be growing when we're not having more babies than we were in the past? We're looking at the wrong end of the age spectrum. We're sticking around longer. And for many of us, that's a darn good thing. Wouldn't want it any other way. If you it's an increased life expectancy is a major force in terms of global population growth. Back in 1900, the average life expectancy at birth on the planet was only 30 years. 2000, it was up to 67 years. Improved nutrition, sanitation, health, and so on. The United States in 1900, average life expectancy was 47 years. Now it's up to 77 years or so. So, what difference does that make? Well, in the United States over the last decade, roughly, for every young person who's been born who's under age 18, we've added 4 seniors. In California, looking ahead, California's population over the next 15 years is projected to grow by about 5 million more people. Or roughly 5 more San Jose's, another way of thinking about it. But it's not going to be distributed evenly among all age categories. In fact, it looks like this, that if you take the additional 5 million people and say, well, compare the current population in each of these age groups with what it'll be in 15 years, roughly 2/3 of California's population growth over the next 15 years is going to be in seniors. Never before have we seen that phenomenon in California or anywhere else in the country. Big changes, big in any number of different ways. What that will mean, for example, is that for every person we add under age 18, we'll be adding 9 seniors. Here in Santa Clara County, here's what the forecasts look like from the Department of Finance, is that over the next 15 years, the vast majority of our county's growth, our county's population growth, will also be in that senior category, roughly 2/3 again. Something we've never experienced before, something I would argue we are not ready for now. Currently, roughly 1 out of 8 residents in Santa Clara County is over 65. By 2030, just 15 years out, it'll be up to 1 out of 5 residents will be over 65. And if you take out the younger people and just deal with the adult population, 1/4 of our adult population will be over 65. And you can begin thinking about all the implications of that for everything from housing, transportation, social services, pedestrian safety, whatever, a whole host of things where that's going to be relevant. But so what? Why does it matter that we're getting older as a society? Well, a whole host of reasons why, and the one I'm going to focus on for the next few minutes is when we built the suburbs that we talked about, when we evolved into Santa Clara County 2.0 throughout the country, basically, it wasn't just here that happened, there was an underlying fundamental assumption that we would all be able to drive forever. Well, maybe not. The data shows that 1 out of 5 Americans over age 65 doesn't drive. And many more cut back on driving when gas prices go up. So the assumption that we're all going to be able to drive forever isn't necessarily correct. In fact, if you look at it, a woman in this country who reaches roughly early 70s has on average another 21 years of life expectancy. That's the good news. Her driving expectancy, however, is only another 11 years. Meaning she's likely to spend the last 10 years of her life as a non-driver. Men, the life expectancy a little shorter than women, 17 years, same driving expectancy, 11 years, so last 6 years as a non-driver. We didn't think of that when we were building the suburbs. You know, we would all be able to drive forever. We could get to the grocery store, need to go to the doctor, need to do whatever else we want to do, come to the library to hear a presentation at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. We could do that. Maybe not. We are going to have an increasing population such as this lady here. Raised a family, she and her husband raised a family in the suburban neighborhood here, lived there for 30, 40 years, raised the kids went off to school, unfortunately her husband passed away. She's now living there alone and she doesn't drive. Maybe a little over the top to put Granny behind bars, but we're going to have an awful lot of people throughout Santa Clara County, throughout California, throughout the United States who are literally trapped in suburbia. The homes that they lived in may be great for raising families, great when they were all younger, when everyone was healthy, everyone could drive and so on, but doesn't quite work so well when that's no longer the case. I often suggested that there are 3 basic sort of goals that we all have as we age. We want to remain active, independent, and engaged with our family, friends, and community. How being a non-driving senior in a suburban setting, how does that affect our ability to remain active, independent, and engaged with family, friends, and community? So this is going to be one of the forces pushing us towards Santa Clara County 3.0 as well. We built the suburbs on the assumption that we were never going to age. Man, not so much. And the basic point here is that our needs and preferences may change as we age. The neighborhoods that were fun to grow up in may be problematic to grow old in. And that's what we need to face as a reality as we plan the future of our cities. Is what worked for the last 50 years may not work for the next 50 years. Another thing that's pushing us towards Santa Clara County 3.0 is the rise of the Millennials. We've heard of them. They're everywhere in the news, almost as much as the boomers were or are. The Millennials are the folks who were born between 1980 and 2000, roughly. It means that they're currently in their teens, their 20s, their early 30s. And guess what, boomers? There are now more Millennials than boomers. We often think of the boomers as being the big generation. Not so much anymore. We're number 2. We're number 2. We have to try harder. Davis or something like that. So anyway, we can't ignore the Millennials. We can't ignore their preferences for housing, for where they want to live, where they want to work, and so on. They are a major force within our country. They are also about to become the majority of our U.S. workforce. So again, what we as boomers or others might want isn't the only thing we need to take into account as we plan for the future. We have to also ask ourselves, what do the younger generations want, particularly the millennials? Well, the millennials are the most educated generation ever. They've had more college. They're also the most tech savvy, which is why they are sought after by businesses like Google. I drive by there a couple times a week, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone over 30. That would be just visiting or something, a tourist. But as a result of their having gone to college and all that, many of them carrying around behind them a fair amount of college debt, student loan debt, which means, among other things, it manifests in the fact that they have lower rates of home ownership than previous generations in their age group. They are more often likely to be renters, in fact, for a variety of reasons. One of them is economic necessity. They just can't afford to buy a house, and especially that was true even before the craziness of the last year or so when things have just gone really out of control. But also the freedom to move. They aren't necessarily planning to stay in their first job for the rest of their lives and get a gold watch at the end or whatever the tradition would be these days, a gold iPhone or whatever. They want to be able to move because their next job may be in Portland, their next job may be in Austin, and owning a home kind of keeps you have to sell it in order to move, and they just don't want to have to deal with that. Plus, they also saw what happened to their parents' homes, the value of the idea that the American dream, you buy a home and it'll keep going up in value forever and ever, and that'll be your retirement. They aren't necessarily buying into that. They've seen that it's not necessarily guaranteed that home prices always go up. Maybe in this area they do, but look around the country and all the homes that went down in price and mortgages were underwater and all that sort of thing during the subprime meltdown of a few years ago. So they're more likely to be renters. We need to factor that into account. And certainly one other thing I just want to mention that I didn't include in here, but I should, that the percentage of households in this country with children is another significant factor to consider. Back in the 60s when the Ozzie and Harriet generation, those of you who know who I'm talking about are of a certain age, that was the typical American households, was mom and pop with 2 kids living at home. Then they were roughly half of the U.S. population had children at home. Right now it's down about 1/4 of all households in the United States have children living, have juvenile children or under adult age children living at home. We'll leave out the adult part as a separate thing. So we need to be planning for a future in which we're going to have more single person. We already have many more single person households. There are 3 single person households for every household with families with children nationwide and county-wide, and again, those averages may vary from city to city, but that's another thing that's driving force. People can't, if you're a single person, you can't necessarily buy a house in the suburbs, even if you wanted to. Maybe on some of the Google salaries you could come close, but even that's in this area is a challenge. So another thing about going back to the millennials here is that overwhelmingly they want to live in urban areas. Now this came from a National Association of Home Builders survey. It says 88% want to live in an urban setting. I think that's probably a little bit overstated, but still a substantial number of them do. It's manifested in a number of things, including that they have the lowest rate of driver's license, having driver's licenses for that age group since 1963. I heard a talk last Monday night in Cupertino, and the college professor at Stanford said that of his graduate students, half of them don't have driver's licenses and don't tend to get them. Their lifestyle, their expectations, the kind of communities they want to live in are very different than what we have built over the last 50 years. So that's another force that we're bringing about major changes. They'd much rather walk or take buses of one sort or another, public transit, than this. As I said, they're the most educated generation ever. They get it. They understand. Another force that's moving us towards Santa Clara County 3.0 is what I refer to as a generational convergence. That although the boomers and the millennials may seem like two very different generations, I think we're going to see increasingly that they are moving closer together in their preferences. If you divide development, particularly residential development, into drivable suburban versus walkable urban, clearly the millennial generation is strongly on the walkable urban side. That's the kind of communities they want to live in. What about the boomers? Well, we built the suburbs for them after all. Why, how do they feel about it? Well, a lot of them are looking at their futures as they enter their senior years. Many of them already are already on Social Security or getting to the age where they could apply for it. Many of them are looking at their two-story house, and those stairs look steeper every year. They're looking at that and say, gosh, I really don't want to spend a lot of time driving around dealing with that kind of traffic. I'd rather be able to live in a condo or something and lock the door and take off and spend a month with the kids and the grandkids somewhere. So I think a number of boomers are relocating. Now many of them want to stay in their current homes, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting that one thing is preferable to the other. I'm just sort of describing the world as it's been evolving out there. But those boomers who decide to move are not likely to be trading up. They're not looking for a house with bigger rooms and a larger yard to maintain. So that's not going to happen. So of the boomers that decide to move, increasingly, they're on the side of walkable urban also. So again, you're having this convergence. The millennials who clearly are already there, and more boomers who are looking at their futures and deciding really a walkable neighborhood meets their needs better than the drivable suburban do. As good as that lifestyle was for them when they were younger, it may not be appropriate or may not meet their needs as they get older. So toss out a couple hypotheticals. Imagine you got a letter from this couple here, and the question is, are we creating the choices for the aging boomers? My wife and I have lived in our single-family home for the past 40 years, but now we want to move to a neighborhood where we can continue living an active lifestyle without owning an automobile. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to? Or consider the similar question from a pair of young millennials. We are the young professionals who have the skills and knowledge that your high-tech economy depends on. We prefer to live in vibrant urban neighborhoods where we can live active lifestyles without driving a car. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to? Those, to me, are one of the fundamental questions that cities need to be asking as they plan for the future. Do you have this sort of lifestyle options, choices for people to make, whether they're boomers or whether they're millennials, to live in places that aren't dependent on the automobile? So these are the forces then that are moving us towards Santa Clara County 3.0: population growth, job growth, limited land supply, aging of the boomers, rise of the millennials, and a variety of other things I didn't have time to get into. Let me pick up the pace here and toss out some prescriptions. How do we bring about a better Santa Clara County? How do we make Santa Clara County 3.0 better than 2.0 as we deal with accommodating 2 more Sunnyvales within the existing urban area and all? First thing we need to do is to think about changing attitudes. We need to be realistic. Change is coming. These things that I've talked about here are not something we can close our eyes and they'll go away. We need to recognize that change is coming, and it's coming fast. We need to be owls. We need to be wise and responsible as we address it, not ostriches ignoring reality, nor geese opposing all change. We need to be eagles, building for current and future generations. We need to be optimistic. We need to be able to imagine a better future. Some of us think, well, how could anything be better than suburbia? My God, it's the pinnacle of Western civilization. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't meet all of our needs as we go forward. Maybe we do have to envision something beyond the predominantly suburban communities. We need to use our imagination to see a better future beyond the status quo. We need to get beyond the sort of sloganeering, well, we don't want to become like Manhattan. That's sort of a meaningless slogan. If you look at the choices, Manhattan and the suburbs are at opposite ends of the spectrum. There's an awful lot of options that are at the lower end there that we haven't necessarily been building enough of. All of these sorts of choices here, without ever even getting to high-rise, this is just getting up to mid-rise. We've got a whole host of choices we could be making as to how what do we build within our communities. So we need to stretch our civic imagination and think of ways that our communities could be even better while they continue to grow. I often hear, well, we're a built-out community, what can we do? Built-out doesn't mean game over. San Francisco was built out in the 1800s. Healthy communities are constantly evolving and changing. The fact that it was built out in the 1800s didn't mean they shut the doors and went home, turned off the lights. We can't do that today either, regardless of how built out our local communities are. We need to accept the dilemmas of growth. It's neither good nor entirely good nor entirely bad. It's a two-edged sword. It has some positive aspects, it has some negative aspects. The positive is that it brings economic prosperity to us, frankly. The negative is it also brings a number of challenges. The negative is it brings unwanted changes to our community, perhaps, but it also brings the resources that allow us to make the changes we do want to make. It may bring more traffic, but that also creates the opportunities to create more walkable, transit-friendly neighborhoods through new development, if we plan wisely. It brings more people, but that's more workers new workers for our workforce, especially as the boomers retire. Someone's going to need to fill their jobs, or the jobs could go away, and that isn't necessarily good for our economy. So some folks say, well, we just got to stop growth because of these negative impacts. Well, keep in mind that if we stop growth because of its negative impacts, we may also be ruling out its positive impacts and creating other problems we hadn't even thought about. We need to overcome our fear of density. Density is a scary concept in the suburbs. You see here, Densilla, tearing apart a suburban strip mall. Well, density doesn't have to do that. We need to have a more nuanced and more neutral attitude towards density. Density, if you step back from it, is just another tool in the city building toolkit. And like all tools, it can be used wisely or unwisely. We've got to figure out how to use it wisely, where and how to use it, and in what degrees and in what ways, and so on. We also need to recognize that, in fact, many of the goals we say we want for our communities aren't achievable unless we build greater densities. We can't increase the mobility options and reduce our dependence on the automobile unless we build greater densities. We can't make housing more affordable unless we build at higher densities. We can't improve public transit unless we build at higher densities. We can't provide more lifestyle options for people of all ages unless we build at higher densities. We can't protect our environment unless we build at higher densities, and we can't maintain the health of our local economy. So we need to think of density as sort of a Swiss Army knife. That we can use it for a lot of things, but we need to plan wisely. It's not a tool you use everywhere and for every situation. You have to use it in well-planned ways in appropriate locations. We also need to recognize our interdependence. We ask ourselves as we're planning our future, who are we planning for? Are we planning for us, the current residents? Is that the only voice in the room? Is that the only values that matter? Or do we should we be thinking also about other people, such as people who work in our city but live elsewhere? What about future generations? We also need to keep in mind that as with an aging population, the well-being of a retired senior population is going to be dependent on the well-being of the workforce. If they can't find affordable housing, if they can't find ways to get to jobs in our communities easily, that doesn't hurt just them, that can hurt us as well. For example, one of the things that an aging population is going to need is a lot more elder care workers, home health care providers, and so on. Well, we often agonize about how our firemen, our policemen, our teachers can't afford to live in our communities. Guess what? The health care workers often have even lower incomes than those. So if they can't afford to live here, don't count on having a lot of these people around to help us with our needs with an aging population. Another way of looking at it, again, supposing we don't care about anyone else but ourselves. Well, think about this for a moment. The experts say that sometime in who knows when, we are going to have another major earthquake in California. Well, if you look at this little diagram here, indicates those are the number of hours in a week. These are the number of hours from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, that most of our emergency workers and so on are on duty. That means they're off duty these other hours. That works out to be a ratio of 3 to 1 off hours to 1. If earthquakes occur randomly, the odds are the earthquake will occur when most of our emergency workers are not on the job, or the people we are counting on in city government to staff the emergency response centers are at home, and they may not be living in our communities, so they may be somewhere else. Where will our emergency responders be when the big one happens? So this is one of the things where we may be shooting ourselves in the foot by being restrictive of housing, building housing in our, especially more affordable housing in our communities. We may someday pay the price for that. All right, moving on to, those are all attitude sorts of things in terms of being more positive about the future, being more creative, and so and recognizing that growth is going to happen, and it's a two-edged sword and all that. What should we be doing about the future? What kind of actions should we be taking? The first thing we need to do is to be proactive. Remember I said in one of the opening slides there, the choice is to make it happen, let it happen, or wonder what happened. Well, if we want to make it happen, we've got to be proactive, and that means understanding what our choices are. Now, faced with substantial growth, we have basically four choices in my sort of model here. We can accept it and allow it to occur where it wants to. We can resist it. We can mitigate it, reduce the impacts of it, or we can guide it to where it would do the most good within our community. So again, the choices there are accept, resist, mitigate, or guide. And all of those may be appropriate depending on the circumstances. But by far the most important one, if we want to make the future happen, is that we need to guide it. We need to plan for where we want growth and change to occur rather than resisting it, rather than simply scale down every project that comes in, well, we're going to cut the density in half and think that we're making some progress in the future of our community. We've got to plan for where we want things to happen, not just react negatively to where we don't want them to happen. We also need to be a little more sophisticated about traffic and transportation. We need to think of trips, not just traffic. The general assumption for most of us is that more growth equals more traffic. If there's more population or job growth, that will just automatically mean there's more traffic. It's not that simple. What is true is that more population and job growth will result in more trips. More people needing to go to the grocery store, to take the kids to school, go to work, whatever, and so on. Those sorts of things. But how those trips manifest themselves in the community depends on how and where the growth occurs. So looking at the common assumption is that all the new trips are going to be taken by cars, using cars. But there are other possibilities: transit, walking, bicycling. Those are possibilities. Those trips, all those new trips don't necessarily have to all end up in cars, but it depends on our land use patterns. How and where we accommodate our future development is going to determine where those trips take place in the community. So land use and patterns and mobility choices are critical. These two sweet young kittens here are inseparable. They go everywhere together. Their land use, guess their names. Their names are land use and transportation. How'd that work out? I'm fortunate to find those guys. My basic point here is that whenever we make a land use decision, we are also making a transportation decision. Even if it means even if rejecting development in a particular place, that's not just a land use decision, that's a transportation decision. That means that whoever was going to live in those houses will now be living someplace else. And that means that it will have transportation impacts. So simply when we say no, we are still having the impact. Another thing to think about is that we've often had this sort of dichotomy about suburban and urban. We're suburban, that's our identity, it's been our identity for the last 50 years. That's what we want to remain in many cases. But we are increasingly becoming urban. How do we balance that? Well, some people tend to think that, well, we're either going to have good suburban neighborhoods or it's going to be urban, but there really is no mixing of the two. I think we've got to be more sophisticated and think that through. We can create, I believe, livable hybrid communities that involve the best of both worlds. But it's going to require good planning. The best of both worlds, I think, is the hybrid where we focus urban development only in those places where it ought to be. And as opposed to what I refer to as the hodgepodge, worst of all worlds, worst of both worlds, where we scatter it around, where there's simply the least political resistance, or there happens to be a piece of vacant land, or redevelopable land, or whatever. We need to focus, if we want to minimize the adverse impacts of becoming more urban, if we want to preserve the suburban character of our communities, the irony is that we have to create great urban neighborhoods to preserve great suburban neighborhoods. That's the trade-off we need. That's one of the trade-offs we need to make. So here's sort of, it's not an either-or, it's not a binary either-or choice. It's a spectrum, a continuum from hybrid to hodgepodge. And the real question for each community is where will your city be on that? Are you focusing your urban development in a limited number of appropriate places where you can create great walkable urban neighborhoods, or are you sort of scattering it around wherever there's either the least political resistance or whatever rationale you use? We also need to focus on, and this is critical for me to say as a planner, we need to focus on placemaking, not just planning. There's a big difference to me. Planning by itself doesn't create great places. Simply determining what the densities and setbacks and height limits and all that sort of thing, an architecture review and so on, that doesn't create great places. Placemaking is about creating environments that people enjoy being in. It involves creating unique places that are unique, interesting, memorable, pedestrian-oriented, as opposed to automobile-oriented, comfortable and safe. We need to think of it in terms of creating habitat for humans, is what we're doing. As we build out our communities, we are creating places for people to live. And the question is, what will maximize the benefits to the humans? Recognizing, among other things, that we are an innately curious species. We want to see different things. We're always kind of, in fact, interestingly enough, the places we go on vacation are often far more urban than the places we live, because they're more interesting. Think about that. What if we could create interest? What if we get Italians to come to the U.S. to visit our communities? Doesn't happen much except to have a picture taken in front of the Google sign out in Mountain View or whatever. But we could be creating better places than we have. We've got the money, the resources to do it, and have had over the last couple of decades. I would argue we've not created a lot of great places in Santa Clara County. Some good places, but not great. To create great places, we need to make an explicit goal. It's not the default. It doesn't just happen by itself. We need to think at the neighborhood and district scale, not just parcel by parcel. We need to become better at planning and reviewing proposed developments. We need to ask ourselves some questions like, how will people use and interact with this place as pedestrians? Not just does it meet the standards of our ordinances, but how will this work in the real world? How will people interact with it? What will make this place special? How many of the residents' needs will this special place meet? And how does the proposed development contribute to the creation of great urban neighborhoods? So one of the other points here is we need to get good at doing urban. We've been doing suburban for the last 50 years. That's been the heart of Santa Clara County 2.0. We are now moving on to the urban era, and we do recognize that planning for urban development and planning for suburban type of development are really two different things. Being good at one thing doesn't necessarily transfer to the other. Having been good at creating suburban development doesn't mean we're being good at creating urban neighborhoods. We need it requires us to develop a new mindset, a new skill set in terms of how we review projects. It's going to require bringing the public along with us, informing the public to make them more knowledgeable about the need to create great urban neighborhoods and what it takes to create great urban neighborhoods, and get them committed to a vision for a better future that they can support, so we don't have to fight, tooth and nail over every single development that comes through the city. Basic point here is that the suburban mindset and skill set are different from the urban mindset and skill set, and we have a steep learning curve to overcome to get there, to really do it well, and we don't have a lot of time, so we need to get good at that as soon as possible. My simple mantra for what kind of communities we need to be planning for is we need to plan to become intelligently more urban, not just more dense, not just with more people and so on, but we need to become intelligently more urban, do it wisely. We need to recognize that we are a transition point from being predominantly suburban communities to becoming this hybrid thing, and we need to make that transition intelligently for our own sake and for future generations. We need to create new urban communities that are livable, green, and urban, is my mantra. All three of those attributes matter. Those are the building blocks for sustainable cities that benefit everyone in the community. Each of those adjectives, the livable, the green, the urban, have a variety of characteristics in them, but our basic checklist should include all three of those components. And what I'm talking about is not some sort of exotic thing from future land, or it's not the sort of thing that General Motors would have come up with necessarily. It's really an American tradition. We've been building cities like this, walkable cities, transit-friendly cities. We used to do it, that was the main thing. We just need to update that model for future, for the future. Planning for complete neighborhoods. Just a couple more points here. Understand the importance of thresholds. Thresholds, we're familiar with them in a number of ways in our life. It's, the threshold for being able to drink alcohol in most states is 21. You go to an amusement park and they have certain height minimums that kids have to be in order to ride certain rides. Those are thresholds. The same concepts apply to urban neighborhoods. If we want to create great urban neighborhoods, the ones that have a diverse selection of restaurants, shops, services within walking distance, and full service grocery store and all of that, lively pedestrian activity, convenient transit service, the threshold we have to overcome is sufficient population. Typically, when cities plan, well, we're going to do mixed use, we're going to require mixed use and that'll solve the problems. Often what happens is we don't build enough of it, and we end up with all of this, apartments or condos upstairs and an unrented office space or commercial space on the lower levels. We need to think bigger. We need to avoid the temptation to underpopulate our neighborhoods. And finally, we need to act with a sense of urgency. It's not as though we are going to, the future doesn't arrive all at once, that we're going to have the same number of seniors from now until 2030, and suddenly there's a big spike, and where the hell they come from? We are already becoming older, minute by minute, day by day, year by year, and we need to recognize that. We need to get moving as soon as possible. So a few final thoughts. We need to get comfortable with urban. That's clearly been a message throughout my presentation. It's not something that most suburban communities are comfortable with yet, but we need to be able to talk about it. Guess what the two scariest words in suburbia are? Density and urban. And even scarier, urban density. Whoa, all right. So I'd like you to participate with me for a moment in a brief experiment. A little sing-along, so to speak. I want you to say it with me 3 times. Density, okay? Density, density, density. Very good, all right? You made it so far, so good. And now let's try the same thing with urban. Urban, urban, urban. Okay, now, look to your left. Okay, look to your right. Everyone okay? All right, well, what we've just proven here is that talking about density and becoming more urban isn't fatal. We all did it, and we were all laughing and wise. We got through that test. And in fact, it's going to be essential that we be able to talk about urban and densities if we're going to prepare for a better Santa Clara County 3.0. Because one way or the other, we are going to be facing some major changes and major challenges. And change isn't easy, it isn't popular. It won't be easy. It's going to require new perspectives, new attitudes, new skills, new ways of planning, trade-offs, transitions. And getting back to my point earlier at the beginning of my presentation about being the ones who make it happen, we need to take control and charge of how our communities change rather than simply letting it happen. We've got to make it happen, and that means we can't be just passive. If we don't drive the change will drive us. And we may end up someplace other than where we want to be. So we need to be proactive, which is what your organization was created to help do. And we need to do it for not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Final point is we need to each write our biographies that are worthy of, in ways that they are worthy of respect. And what I mean by that is, one of my favorite quotes from Lewis Mumford is that each generation writes its own biography in the cities it creates. In other words, future generations will either benefit or disbenefit from the way we plan the city we leave behind for them. So I just want to wish you all good luck in writing your biographies. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
A lot of material, but really inspirational as far as I'm concerned. Very, very good, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And now, it's our job to carry on. And we will, with this coalition, carry on and moving forward, and perhaps just go around repeating urban density and think how we're going to do that. As far as your agenda, you've got the next meeting is August 21st here, and I believe there isn't a program that we know of at this moment there, except we will just be doing some of our own talking and discussing and perhaps talking about urban density and what changes really could come about here in Los Altos with planning. I think planning, besides being the urban density model of discussion,